Before the call to prayer echoed over Ilorin's hills, before the drums of revolt shattered the heart of Oyo, there was a man born not to follow, but to command. His name was Afonja, and his rise would mark the beginning of an empire's end. The Oyo Empire, once the pride of the Yoruba people, stretched from the Niger River to the Atlantic coast. A kingdom of sacred thrones, divine kings, and cavalry lords. It was powerful, but its glory stood on fragile legs. Tradition, fear, ambition, and on the dusty frontier of this empire, one warrior would learn to shake them all. Afonja was no ordinary son, born into the warrior elite, the Iso class. He inherited not just status, but fire. Yoruba oral history remembers him as fierce, fearless, and commanding. A leader, even in youth. As a general, he was ruthless. Against the Nupe in the north, against disobedient towns in the west. He brought victories that crowned him a hero. His post? Ilorin, a town on the empire's frontier. A gateway between Oyo, Hausaland, and the Islamic north. Whoever controlled Ilorin controlled the empire's edge. Afonja didn't just win wars. He earned loyalty. He began to command as if he were a king, levied troops, enforced law, even challenged royal decrees. And far away in Oyo's capital, whispers grew louder. The king's council, the Oyo Mesi, saw a threat, a general too far from the throne, a city too proud, and a man too ambitious. But while Oyo watched nervously from the south, a different storm was rising from the north. In Hausaland, a spiritual fire had been lit. Usman Danfodio, the Fulani scholar and reformer, launched a jihad in 1804. He called for the overthrow of corrupt rulers and the spread of true Islam. Cities fell, sultans fled, and refugees, warriors, and clerics carried this flame southward, straight to Ilorin. Among them was a preacher named Alimi. Fulani, learned, charismatic. Afonja welcomed him, not as a threat, but as a tool. He believed Alimi could calm the Muslims in Ilorin, help him manage Hausa refugees, and even strengthen his grip on power. But Alimi brought more than sermons. He brought a movement. Afonja had risen high, too high for the Alafin to ignore. Then came the spark. The king, Alafin Aiole, sent a message. He ordered Afonja to attack a sacred town, a move designed to humiliate or destroy him. Afonja refused. The chain of command snapped. With that one act, the empire's greatest general became its greatest threat. The rebellion had begun. He invited the wind, but what came was the whirlwind. Ilorin, once a quiet military outpost, now stirred with new voices. Arabic prayers mixed with Yoruba chants. Hausa traders broke bread with Fulani herdsmen, and at the center stood Afonja, general, governor. Now, something more. Since his defiance of Alafin Aiole, Afonja had ruled Ilorin like a warlord king. But power is never held alone. To fortify his position, Afonja turned to Alimi, the quiet cleric whose influence grew with every sermon. Together they created a strange alliance. The sword and the scripture. Yoruba steel and Fulani faith. But beneath the peace were cracks. Back in Oyo, Alafin Aiole saw Afonja's rebellion as unforgivable. He could not afford to lose Ilorin. But the Oyo cavalry, once feared across West Africa, had grown weak. Internal feuds, corrupt chiefs, and the rise of Islam among soldiers and slaves all hollowed the empire's core. Still, the king sent envoys, demanded submission. None returned. Ilorin was no longer just a Yoruba garrison. It was a melting pot of revolution. Alimi's followers, mostly northern Muslims, were now forming militias. Afonja welcomed them as allies. He armed them, fed them, let them settle near the gates. But Alimi was not just a guest. To Alimi, Ilorin was not a gift. It was an opportunity, a place to spread the revolution of Usman dan Fodio, to purify leadership, to establish rule by faith, not blood. And he was not alone. His sons, students, and soldiers, the Jama, began to occupy key positions. They whispered in the markets, they prayed in the barracks, they watched and waited. Afonja's own lieutenants warned him, "You are feeding the fire that will burn your house." But the general believed he could control it, that he was master of Ilorin. He was wrong. In the shadows, Alimi's loyalists gained ground. Some of Afonja's old warriors were replaced. Others turned their cloaks. The town's soul was changing. The drums of the Yoruba gods grew quiet, and the empire's borders were crumbling. In the capital, Alafin Aole knew it was over. Cut off from Ilorin, surrounded by enemies, betrayed by his greatest general. He took poison, but not before leaving behind a curse. Etched in Yoruba memory, "My curse will be fulfilled. Ilorin will be filled with war. Children will forget their fathers' names. The empire will fall by its own hand." The king was dead. The empire cracked. And Afonja stood at the center of it all. But what he thought was a throne was just a seat borrowed from men with sharper knives and deeper faith. Ilorin was no longer Afonja's city. It was the staging ground of something bigger. The frontier was shifting, and soon, the rebel would face the consequences of his alliances. Rain washed the dust from Ilorin's streets, but it could not cleanse the blood yet to be spilled. Afonja had broken the chain to Oyo, but in doing so, he unleashed forces even he could not control. Two armies now stood inside Ilorin. One swore loyalty to Afonja, men of the old Eso class, veterans of Oyo's golden age. The other prayed with Alimi, preached with him, plotted with him. They were strangers once. Now they were brothers in faith, and they no longer needed Afonja's permission to act. Alimi's inner circle was growing bolder. They believed Afonja was a stepping stone, not a partner. To them, Ilorin was already a Fulani city, a holy city, a fortress for the jihad. They didn't just want to rule with Afonja, they wanted to rule over him. From the Sokoto Caliphate came inspiration. Usman dan Fodio had overthrown kings in Hausaland. Now, Alimi's followers in Ilorin dreamed of the same. The banner of revolution was being sown in secret, and Afonja was blind to the stitching. Afonja sensed something was shifting. He called Alimi in, demanded loyalty, reminded him Ilorin was his city. But Alimi, wise and calm, answered with scripture, with patience, with prophecy, and Afonja, confident in his own myth, let him walk away. Then it came. In the dead of night, coordinated attacks erupted across Ilorin. Storehouses burned, barracks fell. Afonja's closest lieutenants were cut down in their sleep. What had been whispers became war cries. For the first time in his life, Afonja was on the back foot. He who had once commanded empires now fought for breath inside his own walls. But this was not a war of armies. It was a war of infiltration, of slow poisoning, of trust shattered beyond repair. They urged him to escape, to retreat south, to raise a Yoruba coalition and strike back. But Afonja refused. He believed Ilorin still owed him loyalty, still feared his name. But fear had changed sides. And so the gates opened, not with cannon fire, but with a whisper. The Fulani poured in, not as guests, not as allies, but as conquerors. Afonja fought to the last, blade in hand, no armor, no backup. A lion, cornered, slain by the very men he once fed, housed, and protected. They tore him apart, piece by piece, and with his death, The old Ilorin died too. In the morning, a new city awoke. No longer a Yoruba garrison, no longer the Empire's outpost. Ilorin had become an emirate, and the banner of the Sokoto Caliphate flew over its walls. Afonja was remembered as a rebel, a hero, a fool, and a martyr. His ambition had destroyed Oyo's mightiest frontier. His trust had armed its enemies. His downfall had opened the gates, not just of Ilorin, but of empire-wide collapse. The fall of Ilorin was not an end. It was a beginning. The moment Afonja's body hit the earth, the north cracked open, and the empire he betrayed began to bleed. In the capital, the Oyo Mesi gathered under a black sky. Their strongest frontier was gone. Their warrior elite shattered. And in Ilorin now ruled not a Yoruba general, but a Fulani emir. From Ilorin, the new rulers moved fast. Villages once loyal to Oyo were invited to convert. Those who refused were wiped out. The Fulani Emirate of Ilorin became a military hive, a launch pad for the greater jihad, and the heartland quivered. The Alafin tried to rally. He summoned what was left of the cavalry, but the Oyo Empire was no longer the force it once was. Too many years of court intrigue, too many ignored reforms, too many enemies now within. Some commanders still held grudges from Afonja's rebellion. Others refused to fight alongside Muslim troops. The army that marched was already broken. Outside the town of Ogala, the empire's last hope faced the new Ilorin war machine. It was not a battle, it was a slaughter. Fulani cavalry flanked them. Muslim archers rained fire, and as chaos exploded, many Yoruba warriors dropped their weapons and ran, not from fear, but from hopelessness. Oyo had not just lost Ilorin, it had lost its will. By the mid-1830s, the empire was a ghost, cities declaring independence, chiefs allying with the Fulani, and former allies trading tribute for survival. But Yoruba resilience did not die. In the south and west, new cities began to rise. Ibadan, a city of warriors and refugees. Abeokuta, built by the Egba, high in the Rocklands, defensive and proud. Ijaye, Ilesa, and others formed a shaky but vital resistance. They rejected Fulani rule. They rejected the death of their culture. And though divided, they stood. Ilorin's jihad had reached its peak, but not its promise. Though they burned towns and crowned emirs, they could not break the southern resistance. And in their push south, they encountered something they had not expected: Yoruba defiance forged from loss. Out of Afonja's ashes rose a new Yoruba generation, angrier, smarter, and unwilling to forget. The wars would rage for decades more. Battles like Osogbo, Ijaye, Kiriji, all traced their flames back to the fire Afonja lit. The war for Yorubaland was far from over. But the Oyo Empire was already lost. The sacred drum of Sango no longer thundered in Oyo. The royal couriers stopped running, and the throne, once feared from the Niger to the coast, now stood in a ruined hall, its shadow stretching into silence. Ilorin wakes to prayer. Minarets rise where once the drums of war echoed. The name Afonja lingers here, but not on every tongue. And yet, his shadow still falls across every stone. To some, Afonja is a hero, a bold warrior who defied a corrupt king. To others, he is a traitor, whose pride fed the jaws of empire. In truth, he was both, and more. Historian Samuel Johnson, writing in the 1890s, called Afonja's rise the turning point of the Yoruba nation. He recorded oral tales passed down through generations of the Eso general who opened the gates to Fulani fire and paid with his blood. But no book can fully contain what Afonja became. A symbol, a warning, a legend. Today, Ilorin remains part of Kwara State in modern Nigeria. It is a city where Fulani emirs rule over a majority Yoruba population. A living echo of Alimi's triumph and Afonja's fall. The past is not buried here. It walks quietly, in dialect, in prayer, in power. His name remains etched in steel, spoken in war songs, invoked by rebels and reformers alike. For the Yoruba, Afonja represents a bitter lesson that the line between resistance and ruin is paper thin. That ambition, unchecked, can cut both king and kingdom. Afonja's story does not stand alone. It is tied forever to Alimi, the cleric who came quietly and conquered completely. To Usman Dan Fodio, whose revolution changed the map of West Africa, and to Yorubaland, whose golden age ended not with foreign invasion, but internal fracture. Young students learn his name now, not always with reverence, but with curiosity, with caution. Some see betrayal, others see bravery, but all see consequence. The empire is gone, the throne is silent, but the story lives on. Because Afonja was not just a man of war, he was a man who dared to bend the future. Once, this place echoed with the voice of kings. The drums of Sango roared across the plains. Messengers rode with royal commands. Crowds bowed at the feet of the Alafin, the divine king of an empire. Now only silence. This was not a throne lost to foreigners, not stolen by ships or burned by muskets. It was handed over, piece by piece, by pride, betrayal, and power left unchecked. No gun was louder than Afonja's ego, no flame hotter than Alimi's cause. And the result? A throne without a king. Today, Nigeria is a nation of many voices. Yoruba, Fulani, Hausa, Igbo. The echoes of empire live in borders, in customs, in conflict, and in Ilorin, a city born of rebellion. Yoruba culture dances beneath Fulani rule. It is a balance both delicate and defiant. The story of Afonja teaches no easy lesson. It is not simply about the dangers of disobedience or the consequences of trust misplaced. It is a mirror dash, held up to any society where ambition outpaces unity, where faith becomes a flag for conquest, and where heroes rise faster than peace can follow. But in every fractured land, there is the potential for healing. In every divided past, a chance to build bridges stronger than betrayal. History does not ask us to forget. It asks us to remember wisely. Afonja was not just a general, not just a traitor, not just a legend. He was a question. What happens when the sword becomes the crown? And the answer still shapes the world we walk today.